Right. So today we're going to talk about toxic relationships and self-destructive behaviors that can really sabotage your success. Once you buy your own truck, you're a small business owner, and there are changes in you that other people may find um, difficulty accepting. So say for example, you know you're focused, you're driven, you have purpose. You have your whole attention on being successful. Well, there are people around you that don't want you to be successful, and they could be very close to you. They could be wives, ex-wives, girlfriends, family members, friends of yours, and they will actually sabotage your career and your success if given the opportunity. And this is something you have to be mindful of. Now that you're a small business owner, you kind of have a target, that people can aim for. Before you're a company driver and no one saw you as necessarily overly successful, although you may have been hardworking. Now that you're making more money, now you become somewhat of a target. And some people, have a wide range of emotions that they kind of take out on you. For example, jealousy is a very powerful emotion. People get jealous. Your success could create jealousy in other people. You have to be mindful of this and kind of protect your business. But jealousy, envy, they you know, destructive competitiveness. I've seen that one a lot too, especially amongst drivers. That uh, are one-upmanship. That's very destructive. The unhealthy competitiveness. That's very unhealthy. That's bad for your business. What you want is to surround yourself with people who are supportive, that are encouraging you to continue on your path of success, that aren't envious or jealous that you're succeeding. You want people that are going to help you, that are going to be resourceful, going to offer encouragement, going to offer, you know, uh, positive attributes to your friendship or relationship with them. If they're not, if they're not positive in your efforts, because you're working extremely hard, then they're actually taking from you momentum and that kind of support that you need. You're not getting it. Instead of getting support, you're getting the opposite. You're getting criticism. You're getting condemnation. You're getting all the negative things that would derail or detract anybody. So there's some memes I've seen on Facebook that's like, even a good seed can't flourish in a toxic environment. So even if you're good, if you're in a toxic environment, it's going to be very hard for you to succeed. You have to create an environment. If you don't have one, you have to create an environment that is going to be supportive of what you're trying to do. So keep this in mind that unbeknownst to you, there could be people around you that are working against you. And in order to be successful, you're going to have to minimize that. You may not be able to totally remove all the toxic people around you, but you do have to try to minimize that. Because people will take you down if they get the opportunity. They'll take you down. People, do strange things when they see someone they know succeed. They don't want you to succeed. I know that sounds strange, because on one hand, they may say they want you to succeed, and then when you start succeeding, they're like trying to pull you down. It happens a lot. It happens a lot, and part of it is because you're doing something that they can't do, or you're capable of doing something that a lot of drivers aren't capable of doing. You're able to run a profitable business. You're actually able to succeed in a tough business environment. And some people don't like that. They don't like your success, and they will try to bring you down. So keep this in mind. You're on a multi-year journey, working hard towards your own success. And along this journey, you're going to find resistance. You're going to find all kinds of, you know, games and tactics that people will play, and you're just going to have to maintain your focus. You know what you're aiming for. You know how to get there. You know what it takes to be successful, and you can't allow other people to derail you from your dream of reaching that success. It's amazing, but there are people in your life that will cheer you on. Every time you have success, they'll celebrate with you. And then there's other people that no matter what you do, it's never good enough. It's like you could solve cancer, and they'll still criticize you. you know, it's true for everybody. And you gotta keep the good ones, and you gotta minimize the bad ones. And it's tough. It's real tough. People may be used to you not having a lot of money, or not being successful, and all of a sudden, now you're starting to achieve a little bit of success, and they can't handle it. They can't take it, because it changes your relationships with people. You know, misery loves company. So as long as you're miserable together, you're a good company. But once you pull yourself out of misery and you start becoming successful, well, the people that you were friends with before might resent your success. And you may have to get new friends. And it's tough, because you had some sense of loyalty with that friendship for many, many years, maybe decades. But that friendship or relationship is dragging you down. And in order to be successful, you may have to cut it loose, and find new friends. It's just like if you are a driver, obviously you can't get involved with drug and alcohol issues, but you may have friends or family who do. Well, you can't hang around those people. Uh, that would jeopardize your career. So in a similar way, other things that people do that are self-destructive. You're on a different path. They're engaged in self-destructive behaviors, and you're not. So you would probably identify it pretty quickly. And you may have some self-destructive behaviors of your own. I think a lot of truck drivers have problems controlling their weight. And eating is kind of like a self-destructive behavior. You're overeating, or you're eating unhealthy, which is very easy to do when you're on the road. But you're going to have to try your best to eat as healthy as you can and maintain your weight. But that could be an unhealthy behavior. If you're around other truck drivers who are not successful, that's going to drain your energy. Typically what happens is that if you're around low performing people, even though you're a high performing person, the low performing people are going to drag you down. You're not necessarily going to be able to lift them up. More than likely, they're going to drag you down. So you have to be very selective, very careful about who you surround yourself with as you're starting a new business, as you're growing that business. You would think everyone in your life would be happy for you, but that's just not the case. You know, More than likely, somebody it's going to be jealous, envious, um, and will actively work against your interests. Um, Sometimes people just don't think you're capable of being successful. They just, they have in their mindset that you were never capable of having success, and this is just plain ignorance. it's a situation where you ever heard a guy say like you need to level up. What does that mean? Leveling up. Leveling up, from what I understand, it means is that you need to get a fresh start and a new environment where you don't have these people that will pull you down, that will constantly remind you of what your failures are or what your issues are. Never will give you an opportunity to succeed. So what you would do is you would level up, which means you start fresh. You get a fresh start. Maybe it's a new city or state that you move to and you don't know anybody, and you just start over. You get new friends. You're not going to be reminded of past mistakes or anything like that. You're leveling up. This is the kind of idea that you got to let go of these people who are there to constantly remind you of what your shortcomings are. You don't need that. To be successful, you need to be around other successful owner operators. If you want to be successful as an owner operator, you need to find other successful owner operators and learn from them. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. You don't need to somehow discover a way of being successful in trucking. There are guys out there who are successful in trucking. Despite all the naysayers, there's guys out there making very good living. They're making good money. They're probably very smart with money. You know, um, and those are the kind of people you need to associate with. If you're associating with people who have no desire to be successful, no ambition, these people will drag you down. They'll absolutely drag you down. No matter how strong you are, the math will just not add up. You get two bad friends, they'll drag you down. They'll absolutely drag you down. So keep this in mind that as you're reaching for success, there'll be other people that are actively trying to sabotage your career. And you're going to have to make some tough decisions. If you want to be successful, you're going to have to make some tough decisions. But in the long run, it's your success that matters, not what other people think. Don't worry about what other people think. Who cares? What matters is what you think. And they don't have a small business. They're not running a truck. What do they know? They don't know anything. So don't listen to them. Surround yourself with the best owner operators you can find and learn from the best people in the industry. And then that's how you're going to be successful. Minimize the distractions and the toxic relationships. Don't let others derail you. Don't let their toxicity affect you. All right, guys, that's all I got for you. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the internet.